Hi, welcome to Second Earth Alternative. We got I'm gonna be straight up with you, really interesting episode. Now, I usually don't do these type of interpretive episodes where I'm actually gonna start interpreting the works of, or I should say, the fictional works of Hollywood. You know, to connect something like that and then say, oh, comes from Illuminati or this comes from some other secretive group. It's oftentimes it's as if you're kind of falling into this never-ending abyss, this never-ending hole of infinite possibilities. Thus, you can never actually definitively conclude anything with certainty. But let me tell you, this one is special. And I mean, the connections, the sheer number of symbols in this episode, it made me feel like I was in some kind of Dan Brown novel, given everything that's happening right now. So if you happen to catch my previous episode, you would have seen that we kind of, I don't want to say it on YouTube because maybe it's going to be demonetized by their quote-unquote algorithms, but if you look at the image, you get the impression of what it was they were trying to imply with our previous episode, given what Chinese officials had said about the United States of America. And so given that theme of this implication that you can see in this thumbnail, I wanted to show you some weird symbols being showcased in the season premiere of Westworld. Now, I should preface this by explaining that Westworld, the first 2 seasons, was all about the idea of a robot being revealed in its own kind of Truman Show type world, where it's like a simulated world created, and they're not allowed to escape. So they don't know what the quote-unquote real world looks like. Now, in the season 3, this is where the robot, or at least Dorothy, one of the robots, has escaped from Westworld and is now actually in the quote-unquote real world. So the whole season 3 is a revelation of the real world, if you can think of it like that. And this is essentially the season premiere of it. And I think the symbols that I'm about to show you will absolutely stun you regarding this coronavirus. And I'm just going to show you screen captures of these different moments in the episode and showcase to you how insanely coincidental some of these symbols are and what it could possibly mean in the overall idea of something being predictive for this pandemic outbreak. So amazingly enough, the episode starts out with this weird graphics where it kind of claims that there is a divergence in China, and it has this weird dots, almost looks very cellular like, and you just have to wonder, what is this all about? You know, is this some kind of artificial intelligence signal, or is this symbolic of diseases? Moving on to the first character, the very first scene, and this is really important in any series or film, the opening scene always translates the theme of the overall story. And in this particular scene, you have here an investor who is unable to essentially sell off his stocks because the stock market has essentially been frozen. So given what just happened to the stock market a few weeks ago, this is pretty coincidental, to say the least. And at one point we had talked about this idea. It was actually our previous episode where we talked about the weaponization of quote-unquote diseases or pathogens. And so although it's a very harsh claim to consider, we do have a certain line of incentives that was brought up in the episode that at the very least warrants certain questions about what this pandemic, or how this pandemic really came about. And then the main antagonist goes ahead and pulls what looks like, I guess they call it implants. He settles into his bed with his wife, who seems to be of Asian heritage. It's tough to say whether she's foreign or not, but certainly if you were to think of this character as a Trump-like character, then it's possible that the creators were trying to create some kind of analogy with this. And just pushing ahead a little bit, this is the moment where this antagonist actually tells his wife that there are security issues, and get this, that he doesn't want her to go outside. So the man goes to sleep. There's his wife again. And then right here, there's an artificial intelligence takeover of his house where it essentially gets, just taken over by some kind of AI system. Now, you're not going to believe the next shot because I nearly fell off my chair when I saw this. The man goes to sleep and he wakes up to this. Are you kidding me? This is a joke, right? So he wakes up with a gas mask, and right next to him, check this out. He has right here a ventilation system. Not ventilation, I should say an O2 system to help him breathe. I guess there must have been carbon monoxide poisoning in his house. And his wife dead. And right here we have our protagonist, well, some will call her the antagonist, but in this particular story, she is confronting the Trumpian-like character, and she says, I quote, "You paid a lot of money to hide your discretion, but you can't hide from yourself." Amazingly enough, as he reaches for his artificial intelligence program trying to override the system, he tells the system, "Get the ambulance," and the system responds, "I'm afraid I can't do that. My connectivity has been interrupted. I've been reduced to core functions." Wow. Almost looks like how Amazon is reacting right now, which I might add is largely driven by artificial intelligence systems. So she repeats this Trump-like character in this very pivotal moment. I quote, "You want to be the dominant species, but you want to build your whole world around things like me." Very interesting. It almost puts her in this kind of analogous symbolism to China. And there's going to be another actual indication of this dependency later on, so just keep this one in mind. Okay, so this is one of my favorite sequences, because think about this. In the very beginning of this series, this investor wakes up with a gas mask and a respirator right next to him. Then he has this robot chasing him, essentially saying that everything is built like her, not too different than the whole dependency on China. Then as she walks away, the guy is then reflected on an artificial version of his wife, who, you know, she looks Asian. You can't say that means she's foreign, but if she were to be foreign as written by the script, then you could say that perhaps this is analogous to Trump's wife. Here is another version of her, apparently looking kind of like she's being abused. He's running away. And check this out. This, if you don't see this already, let's put it this way. I did not catch this until after I started editing this. So whatever reference you see here was completely unintentional and discovered only after the initial edit. So here's him running down the stairs, and voila. Now you see why I'm showing you this specific frame. My God, I mean, can you get any more obvious than that? That's unbelievable. So here is a clip of his abused wife again as he runs away in terror. And in this particular line, he is being confronted by our artificial intelligent robot over here. And she specifically tells him, "You paid a lot of money to hide your discretions, but you can't hide from yourself." Once again, another reference that could potentially be analogous to Trump. He goes, "What do you need here? What do you want?" And here is the moment that she asked him to essentially sell his soul to the deep Chinese states. Boom. He gives up his secrets and gets to keep his life in the process. This scene is really interesting because, you know, something I want to describe about this particular robot and the way that she kind of infiltrated this investor's house. And also that line where she says, "The things that you have are built of me." This idea of dependency. And outside of the idea of dependency, there's also this idea of a quote-unquote silent takeover. If she were to be, as the robotic AI force that she is, if she were to be analogous or symbolic to some kind of communist automated Chinese state. And this is actually one of my favorite parts of the entire episode, just because of how symbolic it is and what it could foreshadow if you were to take this symbolic interpretations more literal. So here he is, he's making a last second decision to, you know what, I don't want to keep my life, I'm gonna go after this girl. And I don't know if this is a warning of sorts, but as he goes after her, look what happens. You see that? She is essentially just a hologram, a mirage, illusion, so to speak. He slips, boom, cracks his head, and essentially dies in the same way that he was claimed to have killed his wife previously. Now, if that's not shocking enough that a Trumpian-like character suddenly is being killed by the illusion of this artificial intelligence that then is pulled back and he is in this other reality essentially facing his inevitable death, well, check out this last shot of him dying in his pool. If you're not seeing this, once again, here it is. The all-seeing eye. Now, I'm gonna have to slow down for this intro because I honestly, I mean, you want to talk about drowning with symbolism? We start out here with an eagle, of course, representative of the United States of America. We have cells. Look at this. There's some weird cell, and I don't know, what is that that's growing inside? Is that people growing inside the cell? Look what's happening with the eagle in the intro. The eagle is essentially going into what is this? Going into some kind of hole or light? Like, what exactly is this? Going into the a jet stream? It's difficult to say, but it almost looks like a jet that is firing out particles. But from the eagle's perspective, it's not seeing a jet. It's seeing just kind of like a white light, right? So check this out. So the eagle goes towards this weird jet-like object. Then we got that weird, once again, the golden ratio spiral. You're seeing it again here. And now all the flowers are taking over the world. You see the whole world is based on AI. And that eagle that was, and you got to think from an animal's perspective, it's looking at, from here, it looks like a machine, right? It looks like some kind of jet. But from an animal's perspective, it doesn't see the jet. It doesn't see the sides of the jet. All it sees is a white light. And it decides to fly towards the white light. Now, everything related to the idea of white light in most cultures, that usually only happens when something is dying. So here you have the symbol of America, essentially not only being symbolically represented going into the light, a symbol of what happens after you die, but it's literally being disintegrated. A little bit much for me, to be honest with you. It's almost too freaky, if I can be blunt about it. Yeah, I don't know. That is weird. That is weird. And it ends with some kind of, I don't know, is this like a solar event, eclipse perhaps, supernova, who knows? I'm not really sure, but definitely a lot of astronomical symbols we got going on here. And once again, it starts with this anomaly. Instead of China, you got this weird anomaly, kind of disease looking particles going in Los Angeles. And something else I forgot to mention in the intro is notice how not only do you have the particles from the plant that was creating the golden ratio spiral now spiraling around the globe, essentially creating this AI type of takeover, but check this out. Remember that disease cell that I showed you? Look at it. It is literally, the entire world is being encompassed inside a cell. Talk about foreshadowing for pandemic type symbolism. I mean, this is kind of insane. So yeah, and here's the disease cell, of course. So right after the anomaly in Los Angeles, look at how we start the scene. Boom. Once again, we got that golden ratio, all-seeing eye type of intro. And you can see the pyramid over here. And if that wasn't enough, the main character is being entered into this world. And as you start analyzing the different details in the world, you notice, very interestingly, do you see that? I believe that is a protective mask, surgical mask. But look, she's not the only one. We got somebody else here with the mask, essentially protecting from potential diseases. Now, why in this random kind of outdoor scene do you have people wearing masks unless you're dealing with some kind of post-pandemic world? In this particular scene, the protagonist is being introduced in his workplace. And, it almost didn't shock me that the protagonist ends up being a construction worker. Now, this is his best friend. It's a robotic with an artificial intelligence that is essentially like a, how do you call it? Like a social programming of his lost friend that he died in the military. So this thing is programmed to kind of talk like his old friend, the one that's passed away. So here they go up to the construction site together, and there's this very kind of iconic shot of the two kind of sitting together on the high rise. And at this exact moment, the main character says in kind of like a narrative manner, "I just have to work harder, keep my scores up." So this is the moment that this world kind of gets revealed as a social credit system type world, something that obviously has ties to communism, not exactly American capitalism. And something else to consider about this is that in a post-pandemic world, it is the construction workers that are going to be the kind of valued individuals, the ones who can build things. So it's kind of interesting that the protagonist gets showcased as a construction worker in what looks to be a disease-filled future, or a utopian where people are very concerned about possible disease outbreak. Now, this scene was really interesting, and I'm going to make some connections that some people might think it's reaching, but just kind of follow with me, because at the end of the episode, I'm going to tie it back around. So we have the mother of the main protagonist, and she is essentially dependent on this, what do you call it, like implants, I guess is what they call it. And you can see her taking the implant, but she doesn't quite remember her son's name. So what I wrote as an idea here is that this is symbolic of the dependency on Chinese state for the medical needs. And at this exact moment, in talking about the implant that the mother is essentially taking, even though she seems to have dementia or Alzheimer's because she can't remember her son's name, the protagonist says, "People need it, but for me, the rough edges are the only things I'm hanging on to." Very interesting line, because in a way it kind of talks about the lack of dependency, not just on medical needs, but perhaps the dependency on the Chinese state. Here he kisses his mother with dementia, and at this exact moment, the nurse explains to him that his mother is going to be taken to a nursing home, which also is kind of surprising, because nursing homes became some of the first epicenters of outbreak in America. I want to talk about this dementia Alzheimer's because it really does feel in a way that they're kind of hinting at this idea that, like, why do you have to have this dementia Alzheimer's scene, right? Like, don't you think it's a little strange that Joe Biden, this presidential candidate that was essentially handpicked by the establishment, has Alzheimer's or seems to have some kind of dementia? So here's the connection that I said might be reaching, but remember this, because I will connect this to another point at the end of the episode. Here he goes ahead and reaches for his app to try to make money. So it's really interesting because it's kind of showcasing a character that not only builds things because he's a construction worker, but in order to be able to survive in this post-pandemic, this kind of futuristic utopian world, he has to take petty crimes. And this Rico app is essentially exactly that. It's, him trying to get money, by taking certain jobs. And then he meets his buddies that he's going to commit the criminal action with right over here. And what's kind of cool about the scene is right at the moment of them actually committing the act of looting, right over here, it says here, "Good life is waiting." And you see them looting the ATM for some extra cash. Very interesting, considering that we have, during this recent pandemic, not only let out certain prisoners, but the enforcement has said that they're not going to enforce all petty crimes. So here they take the box to this driverless car, and the man's got his money. It says here, "You've earned 5 crime coins. Congratulations." Now, if you thought that respiratory scene was strange in the very, very beginning of this episode, wait till you see what happens when our main villain starts walking in. Oh my goodness, she is smoking a cigarette. Almost as if to defy that in this post-pandemic world, in this world where people are actually putting protection masks, this villain is a badass woman who will smoke a cigarette without giving a shit. So, once again, you're talking about respiratory diseases, you're talking about pandemic that hits the respiratory system like no other disease has ever hit. And now you've already seen the second symbolism related to respiratory diseases. So she walks into her building, is having this meeting. It's kind of an interesting symbol. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the Delta that you see in NASA and Star Trek. But she walks into the building, and this is probably one of my favorite lines. Remember when I told you about that dementia moment and I actually connected it to Biden and I said I might be reaching here? Well, this moment really shocked me because just as this antagonist starts walking from behind, this particular board member says, I quote, "Who died and put her in charge anyway?" Why am I talking about Joe Biden? Well, recently, Joe Biden, who may or may not have dementia, I think a lot of people believe he does have some cognitive diminishment, but Joe Biden has just recently promised that he's gonna give his VP pick to a woman. Not sure if that's been confirmed that he's gonna give to a woman no matter what, but certainly interesting that this board member, as this headshot woman walks into the board, he says, and I repeat, "Who died and put her in charge anyway?" Very weird, very weird. So she goes on to start this meeting with board members. Now, this is kind of really strange because there's this kind of all-seeing eye looking character here. This is actually just a machine standing place for a board member. So one of the board members starts the meeting by saying, "The stocks are in the toilet. Pier is a nightmare." The pier and the stock. So two references are very interesting, not just to the stock market, but also to something that connects to the ocean. If you think about the seafood sea market. So the stocks are in the toilet, this guy says. And what does she reply? "It's been 3 months. Things will settle out. The share price will recover, and so will our brand." And then one of the board members goes ahead and says, "This is one of the most inhumane things I've ever seen, this guy." And she just goes ahead and mutes him. So you have to wonder, is this some kind of symbol for, what do you say, like censorship? And I think actually this could be true because follow me for a second here. So then she asks, "What's the source of funding?" And she responds, "The whole point of going private is that we don't have to answer that question." And then another board member kind of intrudes and says, "Look, you don't have carte blanche unless you consult the guy who is missing in this chair." Well, she responds by saying, "He already stipulated a machine shareholder profit, and the machine and I are in agreement." Once again, you got that weird eye-like symbolism, and the machine approves her proposition, thus integrating people, the power of a board member, the power of a person, and giving away to the power of the algorithm. And how strange, I have to say this, how strange is it that YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook all started giving notices that they're going to be leaning on their quote-unquote algorithms during this pandemic. And right here she says basically that it's people who end up killing people, but we all know from season 2 of Westworld that it was the machine that killed a person. So I call this the moment of the big lie. When you're talking about setting up an illusion for the people, when you're talking about propaganda, for example, there always has to be the big lie. That almost takes like this Machiavellian approach where you're actually blaming your opponent for the very thing that you yourself are doing. Now you might be thinking that that's enough symbols to fill an entire episode, but I can promise you that the symbols do not end there.